Welcome to the Cardboard Crash Course. Let's learn how to play CATAN. The 6th edition of CATAN is just called CATAN the game, instead of Settlers of Catan. The main difference is the box. Its better organization and size hold future expansions much easier. But if you have any other versions of Settlers of Catan, then this video will also make sense to you. There are rules for variable setup of the game once you've mastered the basic Catan experience on page 11 of the rulebook. But I'm going to use the recommended setup for a first-time play of Catan, meant for new and returning players, because I'm assuming that's why you're here. Once we play a game or two with this setup, then we can utilize the randomness of the variable setup in future games. We first have to set up the game board, starting with assembling the frame. Each side of the frame has a number on its connection piece. These connect together to make a complete 6-sided frame. And once it's complete, it'll look something like this. Utilizing the hexes of different terrain types and the number discs with all these different number of dots on them, we will recreate the board shown inside of the rulebook into the frame as shown here. Sort the resource cards into the organizers and place them near the game board. These 5 card stacks will all be face up. However, make sure to shuffle all of the different development cards together with this back and place them into the final space of the organizer face down. Place the robber on the desert hex. Also place the largest army and longest route tiles near the game board. Each player will then select a player color and take the box including all of the pieces of that color, and then place 2 buildings and 2 roads from that box onto the board as shown in the rulebook. Each player, according to their player color, will take the 3 designated resources according to the rulebook and place them face down in front of them as their starting hand. They can look at these cards, but they should not ever show anyone else. Each player will also take a handy reference tile. Have each player roll the 2 included dice. The player with the highest sum on these dice takes the die and becomes the first player. You are now ready to start your game of Catan. A game of Catan is played over a series of turns, sequentially starting with the first player and moving one at a time around the table clockwise. On your turn, you'll perform the following 2 phases. The production phase is the first one and allows you to roll the dice in order to gain resources according to what you have on the game board. The second phase is the action phase and allows you to spend those resources on more buildings and roads in order to push yourself not only towards the victory, but also allow you to gain more resources on future turns. Let's look at a detailed look on how the production phase works now. The production phase begins by the player whose turn it is rolling the 2 dice. The total of these 2 dice determines which hexes on the game board produce resources and for who this turn. For example, we got a sum of 2, so let's see who's gaining resources. Remember the way we built the game board. It consists of not only the tiles of different resource types, but also the number tokens on top of them. Hexes with a number token matching the dice roll produce this turn. Because there's only a single number 2 on the game board, only that single hex will produce this turn. Settlements exist on the corners of tiles, and they're considered to be on top of all the tiles that they're touching. Each player with a settlement, like the red player shown here, on that producing hex, receives 1 resource card of the corresponding type from the supply. Fields produce wheat, and so that player will be able to take a single wheat and add it to their hand. Remember that forests produce wood, hills produce brick, pastures produce wool, mountains produce ore, and the desert produces nothing at all. You can increase the number of resource cards that you gain from a hex in 2 different ways. If a player has 2 or 3 settlements on a hex, they receive 1 resource card for each settlement on that hex. So as an example here, the red player is set up with 2 settlements on the hex and the white player has 1. They would receive a corresponding 2 and 1 wheat each if a 2 was rolled for this hex. I'll explain how these get swapped out later, but cities can exist on hexes instead of settlements. Cities instead provide 2 resources when the number is rolled. So in this case, if this hex produced resources, the red player would receive 3 total wheat. This game keeps all players involved the entire time. And what I mean by that is, the player who rolled the dice is not necessarily the player or players that are going to gain resources from the die roll. In this case, the blue player rolled a 2, but the white and red player would actually be the players that gain the resources. There is, however, one single situation in which a die roll does not produce resources, and that's a 7. If the result of 7 is rolled, hexes don't produce any resources. Instead, it's time to do these two things. Firstly, any or all players that have more than 7 resources must choose half of them rounded down and return them to the supply. Then the player who rolled the dice takes the robber off of its current spot and places it on top of the number of a new hex. They choose one of the players who has a building on that hex and steal a random resource card from that player. It's also important to know that the robber actually covers the number. So if a number is ever rolled that's underneath the robber, that hex does not produce resources. After the production phase is complete, it's time for the action phase. During the action phase, the person whose turn it is can perform any number of actions in any order, including trading and building. Trading is one of the largest parts of this game, but it doesn't take very long to explain. You can trade any amount of cards in your hand with other players' cards at the table. For example, I could tell the other players at a table that I would like a sheep, and I'm willing to give any player who gives me a single sheep an ore and a brick from my hand. Players can make counter offers, accept the offer, or all players can deny. This will heavily depend on the players that you're playing with. I've played in both games where they're very stingy and very lucrative with their trade deals. Whether or not you find yourself able to trade with other players, you can also trade with trade ports. Let me explain. Trade ports line the edge of the game board, and there's 2 different types of them: 2-1 and 3-1 trade ports. 2-1 trade ports care about a specific type of resource. If you have a building on this type of port, you may put 2 of the resource cards shown on the port into the supply and take 1 card of a different resource of any type you'd like from the supply. Similarly, the 3-1 ports allow you to place any 3 of the same resource cards, like these 3 bricks here, into the supply in order to take a single card of a different resource from the supply. The other type of action you may take during your turn on the action phase is the build action. Roads, buildings, including settlements and cities, and development cards each have different costs. You spend resources from your hand and place them into the supply in order to place these buildings or draw these cards. When you build a road, it must be placed on an empty hex edge and connecting to one of your other roads or buildings. So for example, if you built 2 roads in one turn, it could look like this, or even like this. Roads are not inherently worth any victory points for the end of the game, but a player who has at least 5 continuous roads receives the longest route tile. This is worth, as shown in the bottom here, 2 victory points. If another player later in the game beats them in the amount of connected roads that they have, they immediately receive this tile instead. Settlements are instead worth 1 victory point each. Settlements, unlike roads, are placed on empty intersections of tiles. However, a new settlement has to follow the distance rule and connect to at least one of your existing roads. The distance rule means when placing a settlement, you have to stay at least 2 edges away from all other buildings, opponents and your own. So in this example, the white player could not place a settlement here, here, or here, but they could place a settlement here. Cities give you double the resources and double the victory points. The victory points are something I'll talk about in a moment. Cities always replace settlements, so if this blue player were to build a city, he would take up one of his settlements and replace it with that city, placing that settlement back in their general supply. Remember that pieces are limited, so you'll want to keep track of the amount of roads, cities, and settlements that you have. Differently, development cards when they're built are drawn from the top of the deck and are not pieces that you place on the board. Like resource cards, development cards are kept face down in front of you. Your opponents may not look at yours, but you can look at them anytime. Unlike resource cards, however, you cannot trade development cards. Development cards can be played on your turn. Up to 1 can be played before you roll the dice, and any number can be played during your action phase. Development cards are either single-use powerful effects, such as this Monopoly card, or effects that stay in front of you, like this victory point card that gives you victory points for the end of the game. Especially, however, there's plenty of knight cards in the development deck. On top of the normal ability that's written on the knight card, you'll also have the ability to take the largest army tile once you have at least 3 knights in front of you. Just like with the longest route tile, a player will end up taking this from you if they surpass the amount of knights that you have in front of you. Development cards, even if they're only a single-use ability, stay face up in front of you for the remainder of the game. This means they never get reshuffled, and they're a limited resource. If the development deck ever runs out, you cannot build any more cards. Play continues around and around the table, each player taking a preparation and action phase during their turn, until a player wins the game. On your handy reference card that you have in front of you, it not only shows the different costs for building things, as well as the turn structure if you ever forget, it also shows the amount of victory points that each type of piece of your color on the game board is worth. Roads are not worth any victory points, but push you towards being able to build more settlements. Each settlement that you have is worth a single victory point, and each city that you have is worth 2 victory points. Development cards, as well as the longest route and largest army tiles, can also gain you more victory points. At any point during the game, if a player ever has 10 victory points, they immediately win the game of Catan. Congratulations. Thank you for watching, and thank you to Asmodee for sending this copy. Now that you know how to play Catan, if you want to add the Seafarers or Cities and Knights expansions to the game, check them out in the videos right here. I've been Ethan. I'll see you next time on the Cardboard Crash Course.